All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Lily Meanstead. I am a PhD student in education policy at Vanderbilt. And I am super excited. We have a great panel here today to talk about mentorship. So just to do some brief introductions, we have Gavin Cho, who is a MPP student at UC Riverside, Deanna Quintero, who's a PhD student at Vanderbilt, Dr. Candace Hester, who is a PI at the American Institutes for Research, Dr. Joanne Golan, who's a professor at Vanderbilt, and Dr. Mustafa Hussain, who's a professor at the City University of New York. Thank you so much for joining us today. So just, mentorship, I think, can really encompass a lot of things. Mentors can be advisors or PIs who are really formally responsible for working with a student, but are also people who informally support students' academic and professional career. Ultimately, I think a mentor is someone who helps a graduate student reach their personal and professional goals. And often in graduate school, students are asked to weave together a variety of resources and individual relationships with senior researchers in their field. And this can often be difficult to navigate. And so the goal of this session is to try to bring together our panelists who all have either served as mentors, been mentored, or are currently experiencing mentorship while in graduate school to discuss how to find and sustain a productive mentorship relationship. If people in the audience have questions throughout, if you could put them in the chat, I'll read them out loud at the end or throughout as makes the most sense. And there will be time for an audience Q&A at the end as well. So if I could just have our panelists go around and introduce themselves. If you could just kind of say a little bit more about your current position, what your research interests are, and then a brief overview of the mentorship relationships that have been important in your life. So just kind of right now, do you serve as a mentor or an advisor, or do you have an advisor? And we'll get into more details in this in a little bit in the questions. So just really briefly, so folks kind of have an idea of where you're coming from in terms of this mentorship process. That would be awesome. Thank you.
I guess I'll get started. I'm not sure what order we're going in, but I'm Joanne Golan. I'm an associate professor of public policy and education at Peabody College at Vanderbilt. And I mentor 3 PhD students, and then I have a research lab with about 6 undergraduate students. And I organize and run our Graduate Women of Color group as well.
I'm Candace Hester. I am a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. I oversee a lot of early career staff, probably something like 100 or something like that, and work most closely with maybe 20 to 25 staff.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mustafa Hussain. I am an assistant professor of health policy and management at the Graduate School of Public Health of the City University of New York in New York City. I have been mentoring students in our master's and PhD programs, and also through the mentoring programs of my professional associations, APPAM here, and also IAPHS as well, Population Health Sciences.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Gavin Cho. I am an MPP student at the University of California in Riverside. Of course, I have the honor of working with some really great advisors, so have some perspective there on the experience of what it's like to receive mentorship in advising.
Hi, I'm Deanna Quintero. I'm a PhD student at Vanderbilt doing research on education policy, or particularly for English learners. And so here at Vanderbilt, I have my formal mentor, my advisor, but previously I work at Brookings, and I have the experience of having those informal mentorship still going on. And while my work was while I was working at Brookings, I also mentored some interns, so I have been on both sides.
Thank you, guys. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This first question is for Dr. Len, Dr. Hussein, and Dr. Hester. If you could just, and the order you go in is fine. You can choose, but tell us a little bit more about sort of the informal and also formal mentorship that you received during your graduate career, and what lessons you learned about how to make the most out of those mentorship relationships.
I can go first. I mean, I think there's so many different types of mentorship and so many different types of relationships. And I was really lucky when I was at Berkeley to have an abundance of formal and informal advisors that helped me to understand, all kinds of things, like how to excel in the coursework, how to understand who I was going to be, how to understand the different avenues that one could take to succeed. And I think similarly, I try to just share with students when I get the opportunity to work with them or early career staff, kind of an array of pathways that one can take, and then help them gravitate toward the one that feels like it's best suited to them.
I can jump in and say I had my dissertation committee, but I would say at Princeton, where I was in the sociology department, we didn't have a kind of research apprenticeship model as we have here at Vanderbilt, where students are assigned to work with an advisor 20 hours a week. I think if you're in a program that has something like that, you immediately have a mentor. And there's a system where you're just learning a lot. Of course, you can also reach out to other faculty. But I think, if you're in a program more like the one I was in, I felt by the time I was forming, my dissertation committee, I was asking people to serve on my committee who didn't really know me for the most part. And I think you don't want to be in that place. It shouldn't be like a cold call. So I think trying to find ways, and I think we'll talk about that today, but to form relationships. I have a lot of relationships with students who are not my students. I've written papers with students who are not my students. So whether that's just, following up if a professor says, hey, I really like this paper of yours, and, following up with that, or being proactive about asking, are there research opportunities? Because I think mentorship in graduate school is very valuable. And I think you should seek it out. I guess I'll say that. And maybe one other thing is that something that was really valuable to me is like these kinds of networks. So through my own sociology association and the sections there, getting connected there, every year I would be assigned a mentor. And those relationships, a lot of them have continued. So I think things like this are really important.
Yeah, that is really great. I think I was maybe consider myself to be fortunate to have had generous mentors. I grew up in Egypt and went to college there, and in Egypt, and then during my PhD at Tennessee and a postdoc at Drexel, I was lucky to have mentors who not only mentored me well, they introduced me to networks, and we thought together about research problems and papers and everything that I needed to think about then, and career goals and pathways. But also they taught me how to mentor. They sort of modeled sort of the way to mentor and nurture students and trainees. And I try to sort of use that myself, and that guides my own mentoring philosophy. In terms of informal mentoring, I feel like I got a lot of that through my course instructors. So professors that did not end up on my dissertation committee, or I did not have a formal mentoring relationship with, but nonetheless, I learned so much through their courses, or maybe their course. And then I would reach out to them and share drafts with them, or ask them, ask for their advice maybe if there's an issue I'm going through, and that also made me want to extend that to my students as well, just to make them aware that our relationship does not end when the semester ends, but we can continue to have conversations, and they can reach out to me. And so I think that has been particularly impactful. The last thing I want to say is with colleagues, more senior colleagues, students in the program, or when I was in my postdoc, there were people who have been with my research group for a longer time than I did. And so I would seek their advice, or I would, talk with them and ask them about, I need to look over my cover letter or teaching statement or something like that I would submit to, for a job, or a draft of my manuscript. And so those individuals, helped me a lot during the time I was sort of in a more junior status.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to kind of turn this similar question over to our students, and maybe Tiana, I'll have you respond, and then Gavin. But could you guys tell us a little bit more right now about kind of the formal and informal mentorship you're receiving, and then what have you found helpful to make sure that you establish a good working relationship with the mentors that you are working with, especially those that have been assigned to you in more formal ways?
My current mentor principal is my advisor, and I think that we had a good relationship. We are from the same country, so it's like very blessed that we share similar background and research interested. But I think that something that has been very helpful in trying to improve the work and getting the most of the mentorship, it's asking what I need, like having a good communication with him. So for example, at the beginning, setting up regular meetings, because he was like more informal. I was like, no, I need a structure, I need time. And that has been very helpful. And knowing that the mentors always, they care about us. They care about that we like reach professional, personal goals. So knowing that also gives confidence of knowing, oh, you could help me in this way. And recently, like 2 weeks ago, he asked me how I can help you now in the part of that I'm starting to form my dissertation committee and start planning for dissertation. And we have a good discussion of how the feedback that I needed. So I think that that's very helpful to have communication and be able to express the ways in which they can help you. And in terms of informal mentors, as I mentioned, I was working at Brookings, and there it was the first time that I have formal mentors that I knew that your advisors, like your supervisor, will care about you and will help you. And I still keep in touch with them. I send them drafts. I talk to them about research ideas, try to connect with them at conferences or just by email, and knowing that they will be there. And what Mustafa was saying, like trying to connect me with people. So sometimes if I'm going to a conference and I know someone else that I want to meet, and I know that they are friends of them, I will just send an email. Could you please introduce me to this person? And it has been very helpful in that way. I think that's
Yeah, I think not to sound like a broken record here, but I also think that communication is probably one of the most important elements to any successful relationship between an advisor and an advisee. I think that having the ability also as an advisee to identify what your needs are is also an important skill to have, something that you can really hone. And I think that for me, at least, it felt as though when I was starting to chip away at my capstone project for the master's program, it kind of felt like trying to drink out of like a hose, or whatever that saying is, a fire hose, where it's just very overwhelming. And so it is a skill that you learn over time, having the ability to identify your needs in a given moment, and then being able to advocate for those needs with your advisor. I think over time, you also develop a certain sort of element of trust with your advisor, to know that the feedback that you're receiving is meant to help support you ultimately at the end of the day, which is also an important thing to recognize. I think stepping into sort of the informal mentorship side of things, for me, my main exposure to that has probably just been more from like student experience side of things. But I think that that's also a lot of the things that I just mentioned are really important. Something that's unique about the informal sort of mentorship that I've received is that it's been from current students. And so those students can have really sort of a really practical knowledge of the experience that you're going through. And so there's a different type of relationship that you can have with that type of an informal sort of mentorship program. And I think that speaks to probably knowing your audience as well, sort of like knowing when you can ask certain questions and who you should ask those questions to would probably be the biggest pieces of advice that I could provide there.
Lily, could I jump in and add something from the faculty perspective? I think students who manage up, I guess it's the phrase, are, I find that extremely helpful as a faculty member. And that means, you know, taking initiative. I think echoing what people said, communicating what your needs are, but also being aware, like if you're working on a research project with a faculty member, what are their needs, and what, you know, not assuming they are running lots of things and forget conversations you've had. So whatever that looks like, making an agenda for the meeting, taking notes from the meeting and sending them around, reminding your faculty of things that they need to do, all those things. You know, maybe you don't feel like it's your place, but I appreciate them so much when my students do that.
I think that's a great point. And another thing, I think I'm not sure how much students feel like they can do this, but certainly early career staff will do this, is helping to make connections across disparate parts of the work that may or may not be as ever present for the person who's like more deeply, the more senior person who's more deeply ingrained in one sphere, right? So if you're taking courses across different domains or departments, what have you, or you know people in different spaces, I think even if you don't facilitate introductions, it can be helpful to hear about how those different parts of the work are coming up for you. And the other thing that's nice about that is that will help the person really get to know you better and get to know kind of your unique identity and interest and authentic pathways in the work. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you guys. Yeah, and thank you please feel free to respond to each other too. That'll make our conversation richer. I have a question for our sort of senior researchers, and maybe let's just go in this order. So Dr. Galan, Dr. Hussain, and Dr. Hester, could you speak a little bit more about how you have intentionally worked to make mentorship a part of your work that you do? Obviously, in some cases it's required, but sort of like how do you think about it? What is your philosophy towards mentorship, and what have you done to really make that a key part of your job?
Similar to the definition you said at the beginning, I think of mentorship as figuring out what my students need and trying to get them there. So if that's something like a dissertation idea, often students have lots of ideas, but trying to figure out what is it that they're really interested in learning? What are the methods they are really interested in? Where are they looking to go after this? And trying to almost guide them, you know, towards what it is that they're trying to figure out and what they want. I guess the other thing I would say about intentionality is, you know, faculty, every student has a different experience, and every faculty has had a different experience as a graduate student, so they may not recognize your experience. I think that's why communication is important. But one thing for me that's been impactful is one of the first students I mentored was a Black woman, and she had some difficulties in our program that I was not aware of until very late. And that really made me think about what I wasn't recognizing as a mentor, as a faculty member, and being more intentional about asking about my students' lives outside of work a little bit. And starting this Graduate Women of Color group I started at Vanderbilt was in direct response to that. She was gone by that time, but it was saying, hey, moving forward, what do women of color in our department need? And can I help provide that space for them? So I think just trying to listen and recognize, that everyone's experience is different, and how can you try to support them through it?
I want to pick up from that theme. I think I think it's very, and on my end, I try to, as Joanne mentioned, to make that intentional. Just spend the first couple of minutes of my regular check-ins with my mentees, just asking how they're doing, and let them just feel comfortable talking to me about some of the challenges they may have been going through, especially at milestones in graduate school, whether it's comprehensive exams or prelims or capstones or things like that. And there can be a lot of loneliness and anxiety. I have personally experienced some of that. I'm sure many have in grad school, and it's just certainly the mentor is not necessarily a therapist, like someone said, but they're a key component of the support structure for the students. And it often means a lot to the student that that their mentor is willing and able to create that space for them. But I think importantly too, the idea of creating a safe space to share and to think out loud about complex ideas, and to be okay to feel okay to be wrong about something, or maybe something that they misunderstand, or that's not entirely clear to them, or it's sort of like a half-baked or even a quarter-baked idea or whatever that they can share with me. And so I think I try to make a conscious effort to try to understand the students' goals and background, sort of their origin and destination, if you will. And then we sort of work together in calibrating and recalibrating, not only the pathway, but also the destination sometimes. And I think Candace mentioned this earlier, students, to give you a clear example, many students in the Masters of Public Health program come in and they're in the policy track or the policy department, and they're not really fully aware of what that means, of where this degree can take them. So in the very beginning, what I try to do is just to explain that there are at least 3 potential pathways you can go through once you finish your degree. You can work in policy analysis, you can work in advocacy, you can work in administration and management, you can do these things in these various settings, whether it's government or nonprofits or academic institutions or other entities. And so that sort of clears up a lot of, makes the picture a lot clearer for them. And so calibrating and recalibrating the destination as well as the pathway, but that can only come through regular sort of conversations and a clear space for them to be comfortable thinking out loud about these issues, as well as the more technical side of things.
I love that. And I will build from there. I think listening to understand each other, it's a relationship like any other, early, and just creating space to be in community and relationship and have an authentic connection is super important. And I'm always, frankly, really moved by early career individuals who recognize that reciprocity, right? Will come into a space, be willing to share and be vulnerable, but also ask, how are you? And I'm always, oh, thank you, I'm okay. So I think that's really nice when you just recognize the full personhood of the person that you're engaging with. And then from there, just try to build authentically from that platform. In my position, I'm not sure if it's like this at a university, but I need to have the ability to work with staff and develop them, because I can't do the things that I have to do professionally without having that connection. And so for me, the way that I personally can thrive is by creating opportunities for the staff that support me to thrive, and creating, work that feels exciting and engaging to them and also speaks to them, so like building that from a space of understanding who they are and where they want to go, and seeing them and seeing the connections that they want to have is the only way to do that. And the best strategy for me to know that is for them to share with me. And it's not that people won't evolve and change over time, right? But like just keeping folks up to date on how that evolution is going, and who they're talking to who else they're talking to, and what else is exciting about that, just creates kind of authentic strategies for that to manifest.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I think Dr. Hester, your response there kind of leads into my next question a little bit, which is that I think all of us, even students, I think Diana, you touched on this a little bit, but can serve as mentors to each other. But we also all have very competing interests for our time. And sometimes mentorship is part of our job, but sometimes it is not. And I think maybe if we could just go through in maybe just reverse order for the for my senior research staff, and just kind of talk about and help maybe students on the call understand how research like, first of all, help people who are going to become mentors themselves think about how to expand their mentoring capacity, but also like help us understand a little bit how sometimes this does or does not conflict with your other competing demands, and how that kind of like plays into your ability to be a mentor. And I think also for my students on the call, if you want to jump in at the end and talk a little bit about how you sort of see yourself as a mentor to others, and how you kind of try to make time for that, or how that can be difficult. Sorry, I think I didn't say the order. So Dr. Hester, do you mind going first, and then we'll go Dr. Hussein and Dr. Verlaine?
Sure. I'm so sorry. I thought actually that you were directing your question to the students on the call. So I think that it really, my answer is the same as it was before. So like, I think when it's really hard is when it feels like it's artificial. The connection is artificial. Like I don't know anything about you, Candace, or your work, or I'm just like, I need something. I need a recommendation. I need someone to read this paper for me. And so, sometimes I'll do it, but frankly, I'm doing like a million things all the time. So maybe I'm less engaged, right? But when there is the space first to build relationship, and so that I can recognize like where you're coming from, how this is like building our shared kind of networks, understanding, growth, right? Like then I'm like, I'm all in, right? And I'm talking about early career staff or PhD students, but I'm not a late career person. I'm a mid-career person. So I'm like, a lot of the folks that I'm mentoring, I'm getting mentoring at the same time. In fact, co-PI on a lot of my studies is Professor Stephen Raphael, who was an advisor of mine when I was at Berkeley, and he continues to I talk with him almost weekly sometimes. So it's like, but the way that I engage him is because I understand his career, right? Like I continue to read his stuff when it comes out. And so I'm like, I'm inspired by it. And then I try to share other people that I know that are doing similar work. And then we just keep building and growing in that trajectory. So I think I know it feels hard sometimes because you're sometimes just trying to put one foot in front of the other. I totally get that. But to the extent that you can try to really think about why is this connection useful for the next steps that you want to take, and how could it be, reciprocally useful to the person that you're reaching out to in the broader scheme, I think it will only help to build that connection and build that strategy that you'll take forward. I think for me and for so many people, I recently had the pleasure of meeting Administrator Ryan, who oversees the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And for those of you who don't know, she does a lot of work. Her work prior to becoming an administrator was in advocacy, and she now has really shifted the conversation at OJJDP, which is within the Department of Justice, to focus on the needs of youth and families and communities rather than, say, the needs of, justice departments, local police and probation. And when I met her, I said, I just want to thank you so much for your efforts. And her response to me was like, this is not about me. This is about the work. And this is what families and communities have been calling for, is to center the work around them. And I almost like felt silly for thanking her. But then what it's connected to for me is like, when we just make it about the work, and it's not about like me or you and like what you need to like whatever finish your PhD, it's like so much easier to just get in the flow, right? Like, so like I'm trying to elevate the voices of young Black and Brown communities that are marginalized. I'm trying to create more opportunities for thriving so that, there's a better equitable space for everybody to be their best self, so that we can be our best selves as communities, as a planet, as an ecosystem, right? And then it's like, okay, yeah, me too. Like, what can I do to help you do that so I can do that too? Rather than like, I just need this paper reviewed. I need the signature. I need an internship. That's like a little harder to get on board.
I think that's really great. It's very hard for me to consider mentoring to be a waste of time in any way. It's in itself, just being able to help nurture someone and see them grow and graduate or complete a stage in their career is incredibly rewarding. But even if you don't see that, or if that's that maybe for someone else, or there are more selfish reasons that you could do mentoring for. The person that you're helping may be a future professional connection, maybe writing a paper together. You're even if someone sends you a paper to read, and it's not entirely in your area, you might get exposure to new literature that may be relevant to you that you were not aware of. As a person, on the tenure track, I'm not able to keep track of each and every single new paper that comes out and the number of literatures that I am interested in. But sometimes when a student sends me a paper to review, oh my God, I didn't see that citation before. I should probably check it out if I'm not on Twitter, for example. And so there, you could find multiple reasons. I could probably think of a couple more, but in the interest of time, you could find multiple reasons to pursue mentoring and make it an integral part of your career as an early career researcher or academic. And it does give off a lot of dividends now and in the future.
Yeah, I think Candace's points about authenticity and reciprocity are very key in thinking about your mentoring relationships. And yeah, I think the more you can think in those terms, the better, because it's one thing faculty you work with in your department, faculty you don't know. I think that's a harder ask because everyone is very busy. So if you ask someone to review your paper and you don't have a connection with them, I think they might be a little offended. They may not be as kind as Mustafa. So I think, people not in your circle, you want to start with small asks. I've had people who will send me a 1-page, these are my dissertation ideas, very crisp. Would you have 15 minutes to chat about it? That I'm more likely to say yes, or we're at an academic conference. Could we meet for a coffee? That I'm more likely to say yes. Start small and those relationships can develop over time. but I think making it about not about what you need and trying to make connections, even though those are important, but hey, we have joint interests, your networks also maybe, you have things you can also provide in connecting people. It doesn't have to be as explicitly, but even though you may think, what do I have? I'm a graduate student, but actually you're part of networks. As Mustafa says, you're maybe reading different literatures. So there are ways that you're doing new work, that you have things to offer to people who are more senior than you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just starting as students to have like we're mentored, but I think that that's also like the cycle. Like we receive mentorship and it's good to give back. And there are different ways that we could do, like through APPAM, like different organizations. I'm, for example, the chair of the doctoral student community group of AFP. So all these ways help us to be also giving back. Like that's something that I experienced well in my previous job, where I was in charge of the interns. I'm giving that a space to start mentoring them, and sometimes I get email from them from a coffee, like a virtual chat, and it's exciting to know what they're doing. And I think that that's part of the relationship. It's not only what I can get from you, but it starts like a friendship in which you know the person and you care about what they are doing. So I think that that's important that as a students we also practice that with other students. Our program, we're saying like I had like close friends from 2 years above me, and it was so good because they were in different stages of the program. So I was seeing the stress, how it changes over time, and learning from them how they handle. So I think that there are opportunities as a student that we can bring to the table things and we can help others as well. And it's beneficial. I think that it's good because we learn new things and it will improve our research and make us grow as persons to help others.
Yeah, and I think that I would say just even outside of these sort of external organizations within your own school, there's opportunities as a student to provide mentorship, right? I think that especially once you make it past the first year of whatever your program is, there are typically, at least in my experience, I know a lot of programs have opportunities for students who are a little bit more experienced to provide mentorship to some of the newer students. And so for me, I know that's something that I'm really looking forward to doing here, entering the next year of my master's program, is having the opportunity to provide whatever knowledge and skills that I've gained over the past year back to some of the incoming students. So I think that's another opportunity that exists for students to provide mentorship back.
Thank you, guys. My next question, I think, Dr. Berlin, you started touching on this. I think everybody has touched on this a little bit, but maybe just speaking even more concretely, I think a lot of graduate students are really nervous about asking more senior researchers, professors, for their time. And, as people who are currently in these more senior positions, what advice do you have for graduate students looking for some informal mentorship and looking for some of your time? Do you have tips on how to reach out to that, how you would want to be reached out to, especially someone maybe who's been perhaps in one of your classes or was in one of your sessions at a conference, but you don't necessarily know them personally, and sort of what are reasonable asks in terms of time commitment also? And maybe if you guys want to just jump in and see who wants to start. I know, Dr. Galan, you did kind of start to touch on this if you want to start. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I was very intimidated by my graduate school faculty, and I think we have a more collegial environment here. So I didn't make a lot of asks, but they are there. That is part of their job description. Maybe it's not in the job description, but they are there, to help you be successful. So I think, people can find time. You don't expect it to be next week. So I think I think if your ask comes with a recognition that faculty are busy, they may be more receptive, right? So don't ask, can you meet with me in 2 days for an hour? That is not, maybe a faculty might not like that, but if you say, hey, in the next few weeks, would you have 30 minutes to da 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 da? I think almost everyone is going to, say yes to that. So I think, yeah, and if it's someone outside your institution, some people have mentioned introductions, those can help. I think some folks will just get, the email box gets cluttered. They may never respond to your email if they don't know who you are. So trying to find a connection after a conference, introducing yourself, there's usually that time, like right after people finish presenting, the session is over, you can go up and talk to someone. Those may be some ways, participating in these official mentoring programs at associations.
I want to say I was, once again, maybe I think I was very lucky when I was in grad school. I got in touch through sort of for informal mentoring from various researchers that were not part of my school. What helped me the most was to just write a clear and short email, something short and sweet, like one paragraph, at most, with a clear subject line, and don't ask to meet unless it's really the most efficient way to go. So most of the time, a lot of the asks can be resolved via email. Like, hey, I read your paper. I'm very interested in this part. Would you be willing to share advice on how you did this particular step, perhaps in the analysis, or something like pretty specific? If you meet them at a conference, a lot of associations now have mentoring roundtables that you can including APPAM, of course, that you can use during the annual meetings. You might want to schedule a time for a coffee, or catch them for a few minutes after their session or something, but be specific and clear and understand what your ask requires. Would it require a simple answer in an email, or a file that could be sent, or it would truly require a meeting? And as you do that more often, I remember I had this professor. He was sort of an early career faculty at Harvard Medical School that I reached out to. He had published a couple of papers on a series of methods that I was using in my dissertation, and I reached out to him. And it was initially like that. I would send like like a simple short paragraph asking for something, and he would respond. Maybe a week later, if he didn't respond, I would try to follow up. I'd give people at least a week to respond, and then if not, I will sort of forward the email to them again and ask, would you mind letting me know about my email below or something? But then as the relationship progressed, we were able to actually meet up in conferences and have conversations. And they were able to say, like, I think this is worthwhile. This is sort of worth my while and their while. And maybe I could send this person more materials, or I could meet up with them on Zoom or in a conference. And so that's sort of how it worked out for me. And I just to piggyback on a point that Joanne made earlier about being ready for these kinds of meetings. And if you meet with someone, if they're willing to give you 30 minutes or an hour of their time, you really got to come in with a clear set of like an agenda, very clear agenda, maybe a checklist of things that you want to talk with them, sort of arranged in a priority order, so that you're making the most use of their time, and you're really not wasting your time or their time as well. So that sort of helped me a lot.
That's great advice. I think that Mustafa's advice in general about like don't ask to meet if you don't need to meet is huge. That is like a super big turnoff when people ask to meet and then they're just like staring at you. Because we're busy, we're all busy. Of course, you're busy too, right? Like you want to use your time in a productive way. And sometimes it's like you're using that because you don't really want to ask for the thing that you really want to ask for, but just put that out there. I used to always be trying to figure out if people would share their data with me. So like, just say like, I read this paper, I was super blown away. Would you be open to sharing the data with me? And actually no one ever did, but what they would say is like, that's not true. I did have one researcher who shared data with me that I used in my dissertation. And another thing that would happen often is they would say, oh, there's this other data set that's similar, or if these data are actually public, or if you apply through this, so they'll give you some inroads. Yeah, I think being specific and efficient with your asks is huge.
All right, I want to give a little time to our audience. I have a few more questions prepared, just if we don't have a ton, but I don't see much in the chat yet. But if you have a question for our panelists, if you want to put that in the chat or raise your hand, and then you can unmute. Is there any? I'll give you a second. Okay. I'm not sure. So while folks are thinking about if they want to ask any follow-up questions, I am going to ask a question directly to you, Dr. Hester. If you could talk a little bit about how mentorship has looked and felt different in a research organization compared to your experience in academia, and sort of what advice you have specifically for students who might be looking to move from graduate school to jobs, outside of a university setting.
Yeah. So I'll say when I was on the job market, I definitely thought of research institution. I don't know if they're still thought of this way, but as like the second tier. Like the catch was to end up in academia, and to be at a research institution was the second tier. And that may be shifting a little bit, but I would say that from where I sit now, it's definitely the better seat for me. Like the amount of coverage that I have in terms of developing a research portfolio extends so much deeper, and the level of like relational connection that I have, not just with, other researchers, but with partners in community and funders and policymakers, it's just a much broader network that you have access to when you sit at a research institution. And so I think my recommendation is, it's actually not any different than what it was before. Like, what are you authentically well suited to? Like, I know about myself now that kind of almost like communication effort to really understand and translate and build like durable, flexible, open portfolio that can constantly be supporting not just me, but the 100+ researchers that support the work that we're doing is a really not the same thing, I think, that you do when you're at a university and you're working a little bit more on a tighter set of projects. So I think my recommendation is just like, who are you in the work? And like I said, that won't be one, it's not a fixed thing. It'll change over time. Like I didn't know who I was in the work, frankly, when I was in the job market. But one of the things that I found is that if you can be vulnerable and honest and authentic, you'll get that feedback, right? Like you'll be in conversations with people and they'll be like, oh, we're not on the same wavelength. And then when I interviewed at AIR, it was just like same, like all day I was on the same wavelength. And then I began to recognize that this is just a better fit for me. Because that it is such a bigger kind of lift, because it's not about me, it's about the 100 projects that I'm trying to help develop. Like clearly I'm not going to be able to, be as deeply involved in all 100 projects. I have 5 or 6 that I'm more deeply involved with, but I have to to honor the position and the role, I have to have my, you know, awareness of all the other projects and like who can I connect them to if they're coming up with challenges, how can I help them troubleshoot those challenges? You know, how can I, a lot of what people come to me to ask about is like, how can we more authentically embed an approach that honors equity? How can we, you know, elevate the voices of young people into the work, right? So a lot of how I try to help people think and situate is like, what are the partnerships that you need to do that? We're not really well suited to take on that role often by ourselves. And so I think, you know, I'm really excited and energized by the young early career staff that are bringing to me fresh ideas and fresh perspectives about that. Like a lot, like they push me a lot, and it's definitely reciprocal. And so I can think more about certain things, certain connections, certain kind of like tried and true research portfolios. And they are often bringing to me like a really fresh, thoughtful, you know, on the ground work that I'm just not, you know, I've been too isolated from. And that's when it really thrives, is we're just all being our authentic selves. We're all putting what we know out there, and then we're looking for ways that it can grow together. So I'm deeply excited about all of the staff that I work with, but frankly, the early career staff mostly, because they're often just really shifting the paradigm in ways that I hadn't considered. And, you know, I'm here for that all day.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great answer. Okay, I do have some questions coming in to me in the chat. The first question is, I'm not sure. I think really if anybody wants to jump in and respond to this. So is it common that you collaborate with other faculty beside your advisor during your PhD? And how do you make sure to balance the relationship so you do not have any problems? And I think both, we have some people who are PhD advisors, but also some PhD students on our panel who can maybe talk about this idea of like, if you're working with multiple people, and how does your advisor feel, and how do you make sure you balance that?
I can jump. As I mentioned, some of my research interests is on English learners. So, on my advisor, that's not he's interested. All the work that he does is in Colombia. So, but last year in one of my classes, I was connected to a professor who does a lot of work on English and policy for English learners, and it was like I talked to my advisor, and he was fine that for some time I could work with her. And I think that, again, communication, like knowing how many hours I can devote to one or the other project. And it has been very smooth. I haven't had any issues. But, and I think that is the point of that. The mentors, the advisors want that we reach our goals, that they know that we need to find our interests. And if we have two research interests and one of them is not exactly aligned with your advisor, it has been for me good. But sometimes I think that it depends on the demands, I think that, and how much work each advisor has. But I think that is worth to try it and to put both, like talking to both professors and see how you can balance the work for both.
Just a quick note to say summer is a good time because you have a little bit more time, and maybe you're not working for your advisor during the summer to maybe check out other faculty that you're interested in.
I think it would just add to that. I think it's important to consider your priorities and what it is you want to focus on, and what the nature of your advising relationship is. Is your advisor also your sort of your PI? You're working on a project and they're paying you, and you're supposed to work for them for, I don't know, 20 hours a week or something. And then the rest of the time you usually have to spend working on your dissertation or your coursework. So you have to keep those things in mind, and always be forthcoming about that potential to work with someone else, or the idea that you want to work with someone else, and just make sure that your advisor is aware of that ahead of it actually happening. And so long as there's communication and mutual understanding, should work out.
Great. We are running up onto the end of our time here. I don't know. So I do have a question that's asking, like, for anyone who's maybe had a situation maybe where there was some tension between your advisor or your advisee, and sort of how to navigate potentially that kind of situation. If there's someone who wants to quickly jump in and address an example of that. That's a big question to answer quickly. Okay. I feel like we almost could have a whole other panel. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just one quick thing. I have run into a couple of situations like this with students having trouble with their advisors. And the way they actually resolved was by taking a little bit of time to communicate better and understand where the advisor is coming from. Sometimes certain things are unreasonable, but other times the advisor just really wants something to be done maybe in a particular way, or the student to stick to, I don't know, a deadline or some timeline. And if the student is not able to do whatever the advisor is asking for, it's important to sort of communicate. So I feel like that would make a lot of difference, just better communication and reaching sort of middle ground.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, that is about time. I did get a couple questions about how to make the conferences work as a way to find mentors. And we don't have time for that today, but I will make a plug that there is another webinar on October 17th in the same series about how to make the APPAM conference work for you, where I think they will address some of those questions on how to network and find mentorship at the conference. I so appreciate all of your time today. It was great getting to chat with you. Yeah, thank you guys so much. And if anybody has follow-up questions for me or anything, please feel free to send me an email.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.